Good morning and good evening to you wherever you are on the planet. This is Brian Eiler calling in from Washington, D.C. from the Stimson Center. I'm the director of the Stimson Center Southeast Asia program. And on behalf of the Stimson Center Southeast Asia program and the Environmental Security program and the U.S. Philippine Society, it's a pleasure to invite you to this readout of the COP28 conference from the perspective of the Philippines. This is a perfect opportunity to engage with those who are coming back from the conference, particularly some high-level officials, on their impressions, on actions and commitments that were pledged at the conference, both by the Philippines and by the United States. And it's important to also note that the conference is still going on, so it is quite a treat to be able to get these readouts as we go. As many of us know, the Philippines is one of the countries in the world that's most threatened by a variety of impacts of climate change. And today we're going to be learning about those, as well as, again, the mitigation and particularly the adaptation practices that the Philippines will be taking to address climate change over the next decades. Without any further ado, I'm going to pass this over to my friend and partner, Hank Hedrickson, to get started with the event. Hank Hedrickson is the executive director of the U.S. Philippine Society, longtime friend and partner of the Stimson Center. Hank, over to you. Thanks for bringing this event to us. It's a pleasure to partner with you as always.
Good morning, Brian, and thank you and to Courtney Weatherby and our partners at the Stimson Center. A special thank you to both Secretary Tony Yulo Loizaga, who's just returned to Manila from the COP28 climate conference in Dubai, and to USAID's assistant administrator, who covers all of Asia, Michael Schiffer, along with Mayor Belin Fernandez of Dagupan, a city in Luzon, on the west coast of Luzon, Tracy Rouleau, who's joining us, who's worked with Mayor Fernandez on a number of things, and a good friend, Butch Miley, who is president of the Philippine Disaster Resilience Foundation. Our three objectives when we envisioned this program were first to learn about Philippine government and societal equities in the COP28 climate conference, and then look at key takeaways. And so we very much appreciate Secretary Tony's presence here. I know it's late and she just got back yesterday, but she led the Philippine delegation in the COP28 conference. She has, by her background, a wealth of experience in sustainable development. She served as as head of the Philippine, she's now the Secretary of the Department of Environment and Natural Resources. I should make that clear at the outset. But prior to that, she served in numerous high-level positions related to sustainable development, including president of the National Resilience Council and the director of the UN Disaster Risk Reduction Alliance for Disaster Resilient Societies. So she is the person to have here to address the issues in front of us today. And Michael Schiffer, prior to joining USAID, at a very senior level, has extensive experience in both the executive and legislative branches of the U.S. government, and handles an extremely important set of issues across a wide geographic area, and has visited the Philippines a number of times, and has engaged with Secretary Yulo Loizaga in COP28 and previously. So these are our two keynote speakers. Tracy Rouleau, I'm going to mention you now as somebody who's important to us, because you've done some on the ground studies. I mean, the third point that I'll get into now is the on the ground view from the Philippines, and that's where Mayor Fernandez, mayor of Dagupan City, she's served several terms there. She brings back just a ton of experience in local government and seeing the issues from the ground up, and has worked with Tracy Rouleau on those issues. Tracy's done some analytical work there, and we look forward to hearing from her on that. Butch Miley, president of PDRF, which is a private sector organization, which has stood as a UN recognized model for development in response to disasters and building resilience. And it pulls together really the top businesses in the Philippines that have come together really to address these issues, and they complement what the governments, both the national governments and the international cooperation. So we're looking at the ways that the USAID has cooperated with the Philippines. We're looking at the view from the Philippines and their equities in this important matter, and then the view from the ground. So with that, let me ask Secretary Tony Yulo Loizaga to kick it off for us. Please, Madam Secretary.
Thank you very much, Hank, and good morning and good evening to everyone. Perhaps just start by saying that our position during this COP was really based on a number of principles. The first is really the principle of the rule of law, wherein that guarantees equity in the global commons. And so we come to the table basically under that premise. The Philippines being an archipelagic country with more sea than land, we have the fourth longest coastline in the world, and that makes us one of the most exposed to climate change impacts. We are also, however, not just victims of climate change. We do have a number of resources under our own belt. And here we are one of the 17 mega diverse countries in the world, and therefore we aim to look at our own biodiversity and our own institutional capacities in order to actually build our adaptive capacity to the impacts of climate change. The other principle is really the principle of multilateralism, and we aim to base this on our own history as far as the negotiations that we've entered into and agreed to, including the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, the Convention on Biological Diversity, of course, the Paris Agreement, and we have signed on to hope to ratify as well the UN High Seas Treaty, or what they call the BBNJ, Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdictions in the Oceans. And so we do have that as the underlying premise of our position. In Dubai, we, of course, wanted to reiterate the principle of equity, common but differentiated responsibilities, and the need to have urgent and responsive means to implement adaptation, not just mitigation, and also pursue loss and damage and see how that moves forward. So technically, we participated in 5 main work streams: loss and damage, climate finance, the global stocktake, mitigation, and just transition, particularly of our labor. Essentially, we look at this whole situation, just building on the conversation earlier, as countries needing to actually have 5 S's. Science. We need the science in accordance to the different decision-making levels that we have. Scale. We do know that cities are important, and this is where our collaboration with USAID is especially important in the Climate Resilient Cities program. Stakeholders. We need to be whole of government and whole of society. Synergies, and that means we need to work together in the most optimal fashion. And finally, strategies, those we have to do together. As far as whole of government, I'm happy to say that we had secretaries there from the DOF, from the DOH, from the DOST, from the Department of Interior. We had representation from the Department of Energy and Agriculture and several other government agencies. We are looking forward to the outcome of this particular COP, especially on the adaptation side and the loss and damage side. And we announced during the COP that we would be going for the hosting of the Loss and Damage Fund board, and we would be going for a position on that board as well. The synergy with USAID and the projects here in the Philippines are very important to us in the sense that they embody the scientific principles that have to do with ecological integrity from ridge to reef, but also the importance of cities in terms of adaptation and mitigation in the country. And because we need to understand climate risk as complex and dynamic, that relationship continues to evolve. And here we are at this particular talk I think there's a lot to be gained from hearing from the mayor on the ground, and that's where the front line is as far as climate change. And so those valuable lessons need to be learned from the ground up. So on that note, I'll turn over to you back, Hank.
Okay, thank you, Madam Secretary. Michael, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Hank, and thank you, Madam Secretary. It's good to see you again after we had the chance to meet just a few days ago in Dubai. I guess I will offer from a USAID perspective. One of the main priorities for us at the COP was to seek to have deep and good quality engagements with our partners in the government of the Philippines as an ally and as a partner to explore ways in which we could deepen cooperation on securing a sustainable clean energy future and building greater resilience for all of the people of the Philippines. Beyond the fact that the United States and the Philippines are close allies and partners, that focus for the U.S. government, that focus on this relationship for USAID flowed out of two things, which the Secretary has already touched on. First, a recognition that the Philippines is increasingly vulnerable to climate-related shocks and natural disasters, as we've witnessed with Typhoons Yolanda and Odette, and tragically numerous other climate-driven disasters and events over the past few years. Too many in the Philippines are just a flood or a drought or a typhoon away from calamity. And I think we're also increasingly aware that climate change is also affecting food security as it changes fishery stocks. It's affecting our ability to work with our partners in the Philippines on health issues as pandemic patterns also change. So there's a whole host of vulnerabilities that the Philippines faces where we need to be able to work with them to create greater resilience. And secondly, working with the Philippines and supporting them as they pursue their clean energy transition is also critical if the world is going to be able to get to net zero in time to be able to maintain the 1.5 degree goal that we have set for ourselves. The Philippines is far from the most responsible for the challenges that we face, but given the size and dynamism of the economy, the sooner that we can help support the Philippines to transition to clean energy options and net zero, the better the entire international community will be. So in Dubai, we had the opportunity to have good discussions with a number of counterparts from the Philippines, both government and civil society and NGOs, opportunity to discuss with the Department of the Energy how we could continue to catalyze the clean energy transition. We've managed to unlock about $6 billion this year for that transition in private sector financing. That's not enough, but it's a start, particularly as we look at solar and wind options to mobilize additional resources to come online over the next few years. We've continued to work, not USAID directly, but the U.S. government more broadly addressing the small modular reactor question as we think about what the overall portfolio, energy portfolio for the Philippines needs to look like in the years ahead. And I would offer from a USG perspective, the announcements that were made at the COP about moving forward on fusion technology also offer a very, very exciting set of possibilities. And we also had some good conversations with Filipino counterparts about how we can work to assure that the Philippines develops the sort of workforce that has the technical skills and capacities that are necessary to be able to compete in these new and emergent clean energy technologies. We also had very, very good conversations, as the Secretary mentioned, on the adaptation and resilience side of the agenda, which is also incredibly important, including on how we can strengthen the Climate Resilient Cities initiative that the Korean government and KOICA, their finance agency, also support. Looking at our sustainable interventions for biodiversity, oceans, and landscapes activity, which fits very well with the reef to ridge concept of the Filipino government, and is really trying to help find ways in which we can sustain biodiversity in the Philippines, given that the Philippines is one of only 18 mega biodiverse countries in the world. And being able to work with them on nature-based solutions that will help us address the climate crisis is absolutely essential. And lastly, a number of good discussions on the adaptation and resilience side, addressing ways in which USAID can work with DENR, with the Department of Energy and others in the Filipino government, on the policy frameworks that are needed to combat climate change, on how we address planning and zoning issues, so that we can make sure that conservation efforts are well targeted, on how we can provide additional data and analysis. This is particularly important for the Climate Resilient Cities initiative, so that decision makers at the municipal level have at their fingertips the information that they need to be able to get ahead of the potential impacts of natural disasters and build cities that are cleaner and greener. And lastly, climate financing, and particularly in the nature-based solution concept, how we can look to work with banks and other international and national financial institutions so that the risks and opportunities of climate financing and the flow of services that nature provides for sustainable development, air filtration, soil regeneration, pollinators and pollination, carbon sequestration, all of that then gets baked into the financing structure so that we can unlock the sorts of flows of money, not just flows from nature, that are going to be needed to build the resilience that the Philippines will need, given the challenges that it will face and that the entire world will face in the years to come.
Thank you very much, Michael. It's an extensive, certainly comprehensive and hopeful agenda that you've got in front of you, and working together with the Philippines and other countries around the world. Mayor Fernandez, you know the Stimson Center and our friends there, and welcome to the U.S.-Philippines Society. We're happy to host you here this morning and this evening, your time in Dagupan. So let me turn it to you for your view from the ground up. Madam Mayor.
Good morning and good evening, and thank you for including me in this discussion and offering me the opportunity to talk about some of the dire issues we face with climate change in Dagupan City, and some of the actions we need to take to build climate resilience in our coastal city. And thank you to the Stimson Center, a partner we have worked with, who help us develop a coastal vulnerability and risk assessment for the city, which I will discuss today. And finally, thank you for the environment, Minister Yulo Loizaga, for her leadership at the national government. For our slide 2, our city of Dagupan is undergoing an economic renaissance and dynamic economic growth, particularly in the service industry. Dagupan is the most densely populated in the Ilocos region. We have about 175,000 residents and continue to grow. We are the center of a larger economic zone that includes much of the Pangasinan province. Dagupan is the regional center for e-commerce, education, for health services, with hospitals, universities, business, and culture. However, we are perhaps best known as the bangus capital of the Philippines. We have a strong tourism industry tied closely to our fishing and aquaculture industries and host the Dagupan Bangus Festival each April, bringing tens of thousands of tourists to the city. Slide 3, please. Our economic success is threatened by growing climate risks that are placing a strain on our city infrastructures, ecosystems, and institutions. These risks include extreme weather events like typhoons, Typhoon Cosme in 2008, Pepeng in 2009, Tropical Storm Compazo in 2021, and lately, Typhoon Egay this past July, all have impacted Dagupan greatly. Extreme weather events results in frequent flooding of city streets and homes, salt water intrusion affecting our agriculture and drinking water supply, drying groundwater wells, and we are unmanaged solid waste and wastewater. The city is also sinking, and we are faced with the loss of coastal and marine ecosystem. These threats are not some distant future concerns, but are affecting our city today, as we've seen in the past years. Slide 4, please. As the mayor of Dagupan, it is my responsibility to work with local and national leaders to take the actions required to address these challenges in a way that protects the people of our city while also safeguarding and helping to promote economic growth. We have already shown that this is possible. To take just one example, new restaurants were built without disturbing surrounding mangroves. These mangroves provide unique scenery for customers while also helping to protect the restaurants from storm surge and flooding. The recently published CORV assessment provides a complete picture of Dagupan vulnerabilities and offers priority recommendations for action. These recommendations include common sense actions like improving solid waste management and stopping trash from blowing onto our beaches and seas and leaching into our water. They include finding alternatives so that we can close the dump site that sits next to our beach, clean up the city beach, protect mangroves, and improve the quality of the water that flows from the upstream rivers into our city. Water that our citizens drink and water that provides the habitat for the famous bangus industry. Last week, on the first day of the Conference of Parties, COP in Dubai, global leaders at COP agreed to support a loss and damage fund for island states that least developed nations like the Philippines, and specifically for places like our city of Dagupan. We are the least responsible for the climate emergency, and our people are most affected by its impact. The CORV assessment, which Stimson conducted last year, is designed to help cities like ours access international and local climate finance from funders like the Green Climate Fund, the Global Environment Facility, the World Bank, development assistance such as USAID or national funding from our government. This type of funding is critical, and funders often require the kind of detailed, locally specific data and information that CORV provides. Filling out the paperwork to access funds is complicated, but the CORV risk assessment for the Dagupan provides a roadmap for us to build on previous efforts and will help us make smart investment and become more resilient to climate change as we develop our blue economy in a way that supports everyone in Dagupan. By closing the garbage dump and improving water quality, we can safeguard the future lives and livelihoods of the citizens of Dagupan and at the same time improve our tourism. But time is running out and we need investment so that we can take action before it is too late. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor. Very interesting. It makes us all want to visit your city, and maybe we'll have a chance to do that at some point. Someone who has been there, Tracy Rouleau, is an economist. She's a senior non-resident fellow at the Stimson Center, and she's an economist who brings understandable economic analysis to government and municipalities and private sector. So, Tracy, over to you to build on what the mayor has just presented. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning and good evening, and thank you for including me in this discussion. I'd like to thank the U.S.-Philippine Society and the Stimson Center for organizing this important event, and give thanks to Secretary Yulo Loizaga and Mr. Schiffer for their insightful remarks. Finally, I'd like to thank Ecosensia Solutions for environmental sustainability and the Ocean Policy Research Institute at the Sasakawa Peace Foundation, and of course, Mayor Fernandez for their invaluable partnership and support in advancing this project. Next slide, please. The Dagupan City Climate, Ocean Risk and Vulnerability or Index, or CORVI assessment was conducted in 2021 and 2022. For those of you who may not be familiar with CORVI, it is a climate vulnerability assessment that is implemented in coastal cities and island states that integrates economic, social, and environmental data to produce a holistic understanding of the most critical climate vulnerabilities and then recommendations on how to reduce those vulnerabilities and improve resilience. As you can see from the CORVI wheel on the screen, each CORVI assessment includes 3 types of risk, 10 risk categories, and over 100 indicators, all presented in a coastal city risk profile. Next slide, please. The story that we uncovered when researching climate vulnerabilities in Dagupan was all about water. Located at the confluence of 7 rivers, Dagupan is a delta city at risk from perennial flooding. Its low topography, it's built on the silt and sand of the Pantal River Delta, and the sheer volume of waters that it receives from the upstream Panganisan rivers predispose it to flood risk, and that risk is exacerbated by climate change. As a result, water security is threatened from pollution, subsidence, and surprisingly, potential future droughts. Some of the interviews that we had with climate experts during the assessment indicated that there is a potential for shifts from predominantly wet seasons to drier, hotter seasons and prolonged monsoon breaks. So too much water, not enough water, those are the problems that Dagupan faces. As Mayor Fernandez noted earlier, limited solid waste and wastewater infrastructure are also a key vulnerability, and also that bangus production and local tourism are closely tied to those vulnerable coastal marine and river ecosystems. Next slide, please. A CORVI assessment scores risk indicators on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 representing the highest risk and 1 representing the lowest risk. We display those risks in colors, red, yellow, and green, like a traffic light system. One of the most striking findings from the CORVI assessment was that the sheer number of high risk indicators, those that are in red on the screen. Though it wasn't that surprising that most of these are related to flooding and extreme storm events. You can see the number of flood events scored 9.16, as close to 10, fairly close to 10, the number of wet days, the market losses from extreme weather events, commercial building damages from tropical storms. These are all the key vulnerabilities that were uncovered in the assessment. Next slide. The Dagupan Corby assessment provided recommendations designed to help provide a pathway that balances economic growth in the service economy with a sustainable blue economy that relies on healthy natural resources and benefits all citizens of Dagupan. Climate risks are long-term solutions and can take years to implement. So one of our recommendations was related to better coordination and planning, focusing on improved coordination with regional and national government for more effective investments in resiliency. In particular, there's need for collaboration between upstream and downstream municipalities throughout the watersheds for river restoration initiatives. So all of that water and the pollutants that it brings with it don't descend upon Dagupan. Recommendations to improve water quality and water supply address the risks to human health and fishing and aquaculture industries from polluted water and declining groundwater supplies. They include improving solid waste management and constructing a wastewater treatment plant, solving that open dump site problem that Mayor Fernandez mentioned with a waste-to-worth treatment plant, while at the same time implementing nature-based solutions in the barangays, such as mangrove nurseries with rainwater harvesting. Finally, promoting sustainable tourism, aquaculture, and fisheries focuses on protecting and restoring vulnerable coastal and river habitats. Corey recommendations include continued education on sustainable fishing practices, creating a natural barrier between the Tondaligan Beach and the Baywalk to protect the shoreline and reduce erosion, and diversifying the fishing and fish processing industries to process fish waste into fertilizer or livestock feed. As Mayor Fernandez noted, the Corby assessment is designed to help cities like Dagupan access international and local climate finance from funders like the Green Climate Fund, the Global Environmental Facility, and the World Bank, development assistance such as USAID or national funding from the government. Next slide. Thank you. For folks who are interested in learning more about our assessment, I've included the link to the Dagupan Corby assessment in this last slide.
Well, thank you, Tracy. Really interesting, and congratulations on the good work you're doing there. Next up is our good friend, Renee Butch Miley, president of the Philippine Disaster Resilience Foundation, which has strong partnerships not only with the U.S.-Philippine Society, but with Stimson and certainly the U.S. government and especially USAID. We are privileged to have Butch here. We've worked together for more than a decade now, I think starting with Typhoon Haiyan and working through PDRF to deal with disaster response, but then also in building resilience. And we look forward to continuing that strong relationship. And we're delighted this evening, your time, Butch, that you're joining us. So over to you, sir.
Thanks, Hank. 1 month ago, I stood in the city of Tacloban. It was the 10th anniversary of Typhoon Haiyan, one of the most powerful storms that ever made land. 197 mile per hour winds, over 6,000 to 10,000 people dead, 17-foot high storm surges. And one of the efforts that the PDRF and the private sector started after that super typhoon hit Tacloban and other areas in the Visayas region in the Philippines was to begin a coalition to plant mangroves in different coastal cities because they protect against storm surges. They also provide a marine habitat for the fish and livelihood for fishermen. Both Dagupan Mayor Belen and Tracy in her study referred to the lack of mangrove coverage in Dagupan as one of the causes for their problems. Now, the other thing that we worked on was 4 years before Typhoon Haiyan hit Tacloban. We were hit by another typhoon. We get hit by a lot of typhoons over here. This time it was the city of Metro Manila. And much of the city was flooded. And we found out that much of the flooding came from the mountains above Manila. And a decision was made to form a group of companies to reforest the Marikina watershed and to convince the people there to plant nurseries instead of chopping the trees for charcoal to earn a living. So we try to give them an alternate source of living. But these are both examples of what the private sector has been doing in terms of battling these storms, because one of the threats to the Philippines, biggest threats to the Philippines from climate change, are stronger storms and rising sea waters. After Haiyan, we made the decision to shift from traditional to more sustainable types of recovery. For example, instead of just giving fishermen boats, we decided to teach them how to make these new fiberglass boats so that should their boats be damaged in the future, they could repair them themselves. It makes it, and in addition, they could use these boats to transport tourists to visit different islands. So it's a more sustainable initiative than we used to do in the past. After another typhoon hit the island of Catanduanes in 2020, Typhoon Goni, we started a climate farmers field school there. Abaca is the main crop of Catanduanes, and we convinced a number of abaca farmers to enroll in the school. We trained them in alternate methods of raising abaca. We gave them abaca shoots and cash, but in addition, we offered them training in growing alternate crops. And we also included their wives in the training so they could achieve different sources of income from their farmer husbands. Next slide, please. Now, we learned a lot of lessons from Typhoon Haiyan, and one of them was that we decided to shift from purely response to more of a focus on preparedness. And one of the first things we built was the world's first ever emergency operations center that operates nationally, and it's run by the private sector. An operations center provides much needed monitoring of changing weather conditions. We're able to monitor storms, not just in the Philippines, but around the world. That includes earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. It helps us adapt to the different weather patterns that affect our country. Now, I'm going to mention a couple of USAID sponsored programs here. Thank you, Michael. But we're currently working on something called the Area-Wide Business Continuity Program, which links the key industries, the lifeline utilities, the local governments, and universities in a specific geographical area. For example, a province, the province of Laguna, and it binds them all together because we realize that no one company and no one city government can deal with the effects of climate change. And what we do is try to get them to work together to prepare for future disasters. Another USAID program that was mentioned earlier is the Climate Resilient Cities Program. And here we target vulnerable cities in different parts of the Philippines. And what we do is try to train them to adapt to the effects of climate change. For example, we provide GIS workstations that enable them to track flooding. And in addition, we help them build their own operation centers and help them in terms of preparing for different disasters in the future. Climate change is as an existential threat. It's much like the COVID-19 pandemic. I think it affects all of us. And no one country or no one group of countries can solve this issue. So I think it really needs all of us working together as a group, as a building on our common humanity, so that we can improve our climate and build a better world for our children and their children. Thank you.
Thank you, Butch. And congratulations on the good work. The way the private sector can complement the work of the governments at the national and sort of multilateral international levels is very evident in what PDRF is doing there now. Brian, thank you once again, Brian Eiler, for hosting this, and we look forward to continuing this discussion led by Brian Eiler of the Stimson Center. Brian?
Thank you, Hank, and I'm looking forward to having a discussion first with Butch and Tracy, and then turning it over to our audience to pose questions to Butch and Tracy. If you do have questions, those of you in the audience, please write them into the Q&A box on the Zoom console. And it's best to pose the question to one of our speakers, whether to Butch or to Tracy. Well, to get started, just a question to either Butch or Tracy, as you've listened to each other's presentation, what are your reactions? Butch, do you see applications for Corvi in other parts of the Philippines? Tracy, do you see other opportunities as well for expanding your own work in the Philippines or other climate-related work? I'll leave it to either of you to take that answer.
Well, sure, because I did read Tracy's study, and it pointed out several vulnerabilities of the city of Dagupan, which are similar to other local governments around the country. The lack of potable water, the increased flooding, the low-lying area that Dagupan is located in. So many cities around the Philippines, including Metro Manila, face similar issues. We either have too much water from the typhoons and concurrent flooding, or several islands are beginning to lose their sources of potable water. When they start digging these wells, they come up with salt water instead of fresh water. So I think the urgency of climate change is really being brought home to different communities, and it doesn't just involve the private sector, but also local governments, academia, and NGOs as well. But I think we all need to work on how to adapt to climate change as best as we can, because the other danger is stronger storms. We're always watching for these storms from our operations center, which is based in Clark. And to be honest, that's one of our greatest fears is having another Typhoon Haiyan or Typhoon Quetzana, which flooded much of Metro Manila. So the Dagupan is a great example of how to do things better.
Yeah, and I'll thank you, Butch. And I'll respond. I felt the same way when I heard what you were saying. I do think it's about water, right? And we've certainly heard that. We heard that in Dagupan. We've heard that in other Corvi assessments that we've done across the world. It's that sort of upstream, downstream connection. What I particularly liked hearing from Butch was the concept that as they are implementing new sort of industries and new ways of doing things, they're providing people options. So it's easy to go in and say, oh, you can't do this anymore. But what they're working on is working with industries to help give people new ways to make a living that are sustainable, right? And that's one of those recommendations is how do you change the way we do things now and do them in a way that is more sustainable for your communities.
Thanks to both of you for those answers. You know, our event is about the COP28 conference that's still ongoing. I assume that neither of you went. Stimson did have a pretty large delegation that went. Happy to say that Environmental Security Director Sally Yozell was there, who oversees the Corvi process and has implemented the Corvi project with you, Tracy, and other staff all over the world. You know, it's a real kudos to all of you for being able to conduct these assessments in places like Fiji and Madagascar and Barbados, and cover the globe with your efforts. But again, back to the COP28, looking from afar, what have been your impressions so far, either particularly towards addressing specific needs in the Philippines or just general impressions?
Well, I have high hopes for this climate adaptation fund, which Secretary Tony mentioned, and which the Philippines hopes to play a big role in. I think the amount that I saw is about $700 million, if I'm not wrong. And just the idea of the creation of such a fund to help developing countries cope with the different issues that climate change is going to raise. I think that's a big thing, especially for the low-lying island countries, because I did read that there are several countries whose very existence is threatened by the rising sea levels. So that was I thought that was one of the more encouraging things about the summit.
Yeah, and I was thrilled with the fund to provide money to countries that need it. We've long been talking about the idea that those that are the most impacted by climate change are the least responsible for it, and now we're hearing that echoed across a broader audience, if you will. I want to mention that I do think that the adaptation, it's tricky to get those adaptation dollars out to where they're needed. In some of our Corby work, we've talked about the sort of scaling from the national level to the city level, and much of the work that happens is at that national level. The funding is more easily accessible because it's difficult for folks like Mayor Fernandez and her staff to go through the process of applying for climate funding. And so, what I would hope is that, the next step that I'm thinking about is how do we make that easier and make that possible for folks to get access for that great pot of money that has been set aside at COP.
A good point, Tracy. The Loss and Damage Fund and other funding that's coming together for funding pledges that are coming together for climate adaptation, particularly in the global south, really is a key to helping these countries cope and adjust with the problem that they by and large did not create. Just as a reminder, it's the West and the industrialized West that have historically been the largest emitters and got us in this problem in the first place. China now is the largest emitter of carbon globally, and really needs to take steps to address its reductions, which it seems to be doing. More details would be useful. One worry that I have about the Loss and Damage Fund is that the theory is that the rich countries should be paying for or providing resources to the global south, and oversight of the usage of those resources is of the utmost importance, because from an American perspective, this is American taxpayers' dollars being put to use for these adaptation programs in the rest of the world. And we I don't want to kind of look at this situation with too rosy of glasses, thinking that the global south is also a place where there are governance issues and a lack of regulation, and it's very easy for those funds to go to use for the wrong purposes, whether into corruption or into maladaptation practices that can convince the wealthy countries not to continue doing this, and therefore kind of a vicious cycle ensues where the Loss and Damage Fund just doesn't gain the traction that it should. So some type of guardrails, parameters, oversight mechanisms also need to be put in place. Now, moving into our Q&A, Tracy, there's some great questions for you. We're going to start out with one specifically about Corby. There's a question here on how many cities globally has the Corby been implemented, and does the tool make forecasts for climate risks?
Well, that's a great question. I think I'm going to get this right. I believe we're currently at 16 cities, either implemented or in progress. So we've done work in the Caribbean, in East Africa, Southern Asia, and Southeast Asia, and Oceania, the Pacific Islands. And the question about forecasting. So Corby is a vulnerability assessment. So what it's really trying to understand is where are the most critical vulnerabilities. And so we're not looking to sort of forecast in the traditional way that folks think about it, like, how much is sea level going to rise? But more so, it's a relative assessment that takes a current climate vulnerability and says, has this vulnerability been getting better, or has it been getting worse? And in the future, do we expect it to get better, and we expect it to get worse? And how important that is, because what Corby's really about is pinpointing where those most critical issues are now and 10 years down the future.
Thanks. And Tracy, there's another question here about the future of Corby. Just to be clear, this is an ongoing project with the possibility of conducting activities and assessments in other cities around the world?
Yes, we are always looking for new folks that are interested in implementing Corby's. So as you noted, Sally Ozell at Stimson Center is the one to contact. She's our fearless leader who traveled to COP for us this past week. So yeah.
Thanks, Tracy. We've got a question for either Butch or Tracy. Butch, to you first. I think this question is also coming out of the pandemic, noting some linkages between climate and health, climate change adaptation, climate change effects, and possible health issues that arise from poor adaptation to climate change. Within your sphere of activities, are you making this connection? Are you also making any linkages, or do you see those in the Philippines who are making a connection between climate change and health?
Well, the increased flooding is certainly affecting people, and there are a lot of diseases connected with that. I mean, there are waterborne diseases that are increasing. We get hit by so much flooding, to be honest, that when you start wading in these floods, you're exposed to all sorts of diseases. I think it's forgot what the name was, but there are rat-borne diseases that you're exposed to. If you have an open wound, then you're at risk of dying. There's also pneumonia. Older people are at risk. But I think just the bigger risk is to people's livelihoods and really the forced migration that the rising sea levels leads to. Because if the water keeps rising, there's so many low-lying cities in the Philippines, and the populations, coastal communities that live next to the water, are gradually being forced to move to other places in the country or to other parts of the world, to be honest. So I think that's one of the potential global effects of climate change, is there's going to be some more forced migration from these low-lying areas due to the rising sea levels to other areas of the world. So it's really a crisis that involves all of us.
Thanks. And just to respond to that, that climate migration crisis is already likely playing out. And if we don't get under this and shine a better light on it, come up with more effective approaches to reduce or to receive new climate migrants or climate refugees, if you will, we can easily see a backlash, both against the climate agenda from, say, nationalist actors within countries who want to keep climate refugees out, or via other modalities. And it's a worrisome future, again, if we're not able to address this issue in the current state.
I heard that the government of Tuvalu actually purchased land in New Zealand so that the residents could migrate there as the water rises in their island country. So that might be a business model for the future for other countries.
Right. Coming into a question from Sally Ozell, who specifically asked about Dagupan. Sally's joining us as well. How can the city now take steps to work with, say, U.S. government programming such as USAID cities to start to take action and build resilience-based projects? What steps does Dagupan need to take? And as well as potential donors who could support this. Climate finance for developing coastal cities and countries was highlighted during the COP last week. What are the steps that cities like Dagupan should take to access public and private financing?
I guess I'll take a shot at that. I think that getting these assessments like Corby helps, but then I think it's accessing the programs like USAID's Cities program and finding potentially assistance to figure out how to travel through the maze of application process. And perhaps it's national governments can provide aid to regional and local areas, again, where the national governments may not be able to provide funding, they may be able to provide capacity. So that's one of the big pieces that we often find in a Corvi assessment is that the folks on the ground know what the problems are. They have good ideas on how to fix them, but it's really difficult for them to have the capacity while they're running a city, for instance, while Mayor Fernandez and her staff are running their city, to actually be able to, pass through that maze of paperwork and information that's required. And so technical capacity building seems like a great opportunity for that could be provided by national governments or folks like USAID Cities Program to get these things running and off the ground.
Thanks, Tracy. We've got a few minutes left. Hank, just a note to you, I'm going to kick it over to you in about 3 minutes for closing remarks. As we go back to the questions, there's a question about Iloilo City in central Philippines. Butch, I think this one's to you. Noting that Iloilo City has successfully built flood control structures, the city has also revived the polluted river there into a viable source of tourism revenues, a center for business hubs and even small-scale fishing. These programs took years, but now we can see the benefits. What worked for city management that can be replicated in other cities?
Well, I think everything depends on local leadership. We saw that not just for climate change, but during times of crisis, such as after a storm. When the local leadership is there, it makes a huge difference. I visited Iloilo. It's a great city. It's a very walkable city now. They've got the whole pathway along their river. They've cleaned it up. And coincidentally, a number of people from Iloilo visited our operations center in Clark today because they're planning to build their own operations center so they can track weather patterns and weather systems. But it's really mayors like Mayor Belen in Dagupan that are going to play a key role in terms of this battle. But as I said, they can't do it alone.
Thanks. Go ahead.
You're right, sir.
Madam
In our place, we have our own command center for studying in advance if there will be any calamity that would affect us, and we are being supported by the national government. And but the worst problem that we have right now is really how to close the dam site. And every day, piles of garbage has been going up, and we have about 30 to 35 tons a day of garbage that we have to resolve, because the biggest problem that we have right now is the dam site is located within the beach area. So I think we would really be needing a lot of support to make sure that the dam site or the garbage will be addressed immediately.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And big thanks to all of you for joining us on this panel, particularly those who are calling in late at night from the Philippines. This has been a really fruitful discussion. As a reminder, we're on the record. Those of you tuning in from the media can cite anything that has been said during this event, and a video of the event will be posted on the Stimson website and the U.S.-Philippine Society website soon after the closing of this event. Hank, I'm going to pass this back to you for closing remarks. Thank you, Hank.
Well, thank you, Brian, and thank all of our participants here, starting with Secretary Tony Yulo Loizaga for her leadership and for so clearly spelling out the priorities of the Philippine government during the COP climate conference and then looking ahead. Thanks to USAID Assistant Administrator Michael Schiffer for describing USAID's engagement, both more broadly across the Asia and more specifically cooperation with the Philippines. We thank you, Mayor Fernandez, for joining us for an on-the-ground look at the impact of climate and what you're doing and your leadership at the municipal level, and then the new tandem here with Tracy and Butch, who not only spelled out what they're doing coming from different angles, economic analysis, and then mobilizing business as PDRF has done so well, and describing the good work that you're doing and the way forward on that. I might just conclude by mentioning that the Philippines, and it's been said before, is one of the world's most highly vulnerable countries. And it's not just climate change; it's in the ring of fire, and it's which means they've got the threat of earthquakes and volcanoes, and it's a very highly populated country, 110 plus million people now, and it's a booming economy and coming out of the COVID. So there's a lot at stake, and as Michael Schiffer pointed out, there is this alliance, importantly, and more broadly, more strategically important for the United States and the Philippines. So we have a lot at stake. We here at the U.S. Philippine Society in trying to do what we can to point out areas of cooperation, and we're so glad that we have this partnership with all of you, and this morning here and this evening there, especially with the Stimson Center. So Brian, thank you very much, and Courtney, much appreciated your good work in putting this together. Thank you.
Thank you, Hank. Thanks to all for joining. Everyone be well. Have a good evening wherever you are. Have a good morning.